Welcome everyone, Christine here with a discussion about some of the best races in Total War Warhammer 3, Immortal Empires. The top 5 best races to play at the moment in the game. But what are the best races to overall play? What makes them so good? Is it strength? Not really. I actually don't think very highly of the strongest races in the game. That would be like Warriors of Chaos and Wood Elves, if you want to know my opinion on that. Don't get me wrong, like there's other races that are strong, but like Warriors of Chaos and Wood Elves are so ridiculously overpowered in a campaign. From a practical standpoint, I'll be honest, it's not really fun to play either of them in a lot of ways. Or if you're playing them, you kind of have to ignore a lot of the stuff that you can do in order to have a good time. Whereas other races just naturally will force you or incentivize you to have a really solid time. So at number 5, we have the Empire. And if the Empire is starting at number 5, you know that things are going to be very interesting much higher on the list. What I find very compelling about the Empire is they have many different playstyles. You can go with a ranged archer playstyle, you can go with a handgunner playstyle, you can focus on cavalry. While infantry is lacking at least great swords and spearmen, you can make melee heroes work quite well because you can get a lot of them fairly easily, and you can have a good amount of melee power if you so desire. Magic is also fairly decent. In fact, Imperial mages with the change to their skill lines may be better than High Elven mages. Isn't that the sad state of affairs? Don't get me wrong, High Elven mages can still get those wonderful, wonderful traits, but in terms of the skill line options, yeah, Imperial mages are really good right now. You can get big entities with land ships and siege tanks if you want. All of those choices are available in a campaign. And then on top of that, in Karl Franz's campaign in particular, you do have a lot of different paths you can go for. You can go take Marienburg, you can go into Bretonnia, you can try and rush Vlad, you can try and rush Festus. All of these options do work. And it is that choice and that variety that makes the Empire stand out as a race compared to many other options on this list. Mind you, it's not just about Karl Franz's campaign. The amount of insanity that you can get going with the Guild campaign is also fairly ridiculous. Like, quite a lot of choice in this campaign as well. Don't get me wrong on that. Or you have a campaign as Elspeth. Even she, while she's more direct on countering Vlad, she also has a good amount of choices, more focused on the southern portion of the Empire, especially now that we've got Supercharged Scrag and Gorbad to deal with. The one downside of the Empire, I would say, is that Volkmar's campaign and Marcus Wolfhardt's campaign are not good as they currently stand. So that is one downside we gotta acknowledge. But between Karl Franz, Elspeth, and Guild, you do have 3 great campaigns for a race with a lot of choices, a lot of consequences to those choices. And what I do personally value is the following. Do I have the ability of playing a race in many different ways? When I'm starting a campaign for a race, do I have a lot of choices, options, possibilities available to me? You do have that with the Empire. Far more so than a race like the Lizardmen. But it also can't just be free power, like the Warriors of Chaos, because Warriors of Chaos technically have a lot of choice, but it is, again, that situation of just a nothing campaign, because nothing is going to force you to stop and think, if I go too far, this is going to blow up in my face. I mean, it can't happen in any campaign as any race, but the consequences are almost non-existent for Warriors of Chaos. They are very much there for the Empire. At number 4, we have the Skaven. And while the Skaven have certainly not gotten any kind of updates ever since the release of Immortal Empires, they still are a really, really well-designed race. They have vulnerabilities. Their economy can implode very quickly. They can run out of food and pay significant costs across their entire empire. Their units might be effective, but the auto-resolve they deal with is not great. I wish that was fixed for the record, but it is something worth mentioning. I mean, there are certainly units that do well in auto-resolve, there's others that don't. What this means is, as the Skaven, you do have a lot of vulnerabilities, but you also have ridiculous levels of strength. Between the beasts you can get as the Skaven, like things like rat ogres or brute horrors or mutant rat ogres, the artillery you have access to as the Skaven, the weapon teams you have access to as the Skaven, the sneaky boys you have access to as the Skaven. The only real playstyle that's not really worth it is the melee Skaven or melee infantry Skaven, because Star Vermin get the job done, but yeah, they're too expensive. They take too long to really get going, and clan rats and Skaven slaves are just never ever worth recruiting in a campaign. But regardless of that, you do have choices. There's so many different choices, like even to consider like the Plague Priest playstyle, Plague Priest and Plague Monk playstyle that you do have access to. You have a wide variety of heroes, you have a wide variety of legendary lords that do have different campaigns and different campaign dynamics. And because of the way the Skaven work in terms of their settlements, you start your campaign as the Skaven in a really awesome spot, because when you start the campaign, one of the first choices you're going to have is what do you do early on with food, and how do you spend it? Because one of the things, like, just auto-resolving this situation is like, oh, I can use a bunch of food to get the tier 3, maybe even tier 4 settlement if I have enough. I don't in this case. Or I can, in this case I would take this settlement at tier 1, so I can develop it even further, that kind of stuff. Those are all choices in a campaign. Consequential. Like, consider this campaign as quick. You could rush for Caracade Peaks very quickly, or you could delay going for Caracade Peaks as quickly as possible, take territory around Caracade Peaks so you're building up to a lot of food and food capacity, and then go directly for Caracade Peaks to get it as a tier 5 settlement. But then that comes with the downside, or the consequences, that if you do that, you might just bankrupt yourself. You might, in both money and terms of food, but you do end up being able to recruit a lot of units. But the downside of being able to recruit a lot of units, and this is what I think is wonderful about the Skaven, the downside of being able to do that is it's very easy to fall into a lot of traps where you end up losing, where you end up recruiting armies that you don't need, that are too expensive for what you can afford. Just because you can get the tier 5 settlement very quickly as the Skaven does not necessarily mean you want to start spamming tier 5 or even tier 3 units as a Skaven. Those are some of the traps to take into consideration when playing a Skaven campaign. I think that's what helps elevate the race above so many others that do exist in the game right now, and makes it one of my most favorite races to play. Except that issue with auto-resolve, that does genuinely suck, because it does mean you have to fight a bunch of pointless grindy battles when you could win them. I guess you could always use AR mods for the sake of that, but even then, it's not perfect to be certain on it. I think someone presented a different solution. Just use the heal command, right? Because you can always, because if you fight some of these battles manually, you'll win these battles with minimal fucking casualties, and it's like just a waste of your life by playing them. Maybe that is the better option. What do you guys think? Right, just play with default auto-resolve, because there are problems with modded auto-resolve, all kinds of issues, where it's just like, okay, I know I could win this battle. You gotta be, reason. I think that might be a more decent option. What do I know? And number 3, we have ogres, and if it was just Arbold undefeated to consider for an ogre legendary lord, it would be higher. But we do have Skulltaker, we do have Scarbrand. But here's the thing. Even though Arbold has the best Khorne campaign by far because of all the constant nonsensical teleportation he's going around, which does add campaign variety, does feature actual threats, there's actual stakes in this campaign, because if you lose a battle with this guy, yeah, sure, is unlikely you'll lose a battle with him, especially with an army like this versus a poor Nakai over here who's just going to be his latest victim. But you do have actual stakes. That said, even in Skulltaker and Scarbrand's campaign, you do have a decent amount of variety available in your campaign, because with all the heroes that are able to set up cults, and with the constant cult teleportation regardless of which Khorne campaign you're talking about, you have a lot of freaking flexibility to get around places and just go fight people. See, this was the thing that always bothered me about Khorne. It's people would always justify it's like, well, you can fight plenty of people. Yeah, but most fights are board against dirt. But now you can seek out greater fights and increase your campaign potential and make things interesting and vassalize other factions. Yes, the Khorne diplomacy is back on the menu, boys and girls. There's a lot of ridiculous stuff that you can do. Another thing that I really like about Khorne is that Khorne in general doesn't really care about economic buildings. And so instead of having to build a settlement like the High Elves where you have 3 different economic buildings that are just there for fluff, you just build unit recruitment buildings in most Khorne campaigns. The only building you actually bother with is not even this one that gives you, well, you would want one of these to get the legendary hero, but you mostly just bother with the growth building, so you can get to higher tiers, so you can get bigger fights, so you can get bigger armies. The only downside I would say with Khorne is like the baseline recruitment slots are just a bit too low. I'd probably give them free by default, just perspective on that. Subject, sure, yes, I know you can increase it by an extra one with the commandment, but getting access to higher tiers is probably more important from my personal perspective. So, anyone who complains Khorne is in a worse place, I'm like, the unit variety is better, the campaign dynamics are better, the level of power is ridiculous. Sure, it's not the same ridiculous nonsense that Scarbrand could do pre-patch, but that was just plain bullshit of the highest order. Just because someone can win a campaign very quickly does not mean that they're doing so with good mechanics. Scarbrand's campaign mechanics were just utter bullshit. I mean, he's still Scarbrand, even now, but I do think, like, this is what Khorne should have been from day one, instead of all the rubbish we had to endure for so much time. And look at him, he's running away. Yeah, by the way, don't teleport to Nakai, you'll end up in a situation like this where good luck trying to deal with him. I do hate that. Actually, that I picked the challenge over here in this situation. But hey, let's just put down a raiding and maybe we can get Skella right here. Just worth pointing out, it does have some of its downsides with the map over there, but yeah, like the unit variety, I'm not I think it would be better if they didn't have this Demon Immortal split, but then again, considering how many buildings you can get, which is Mortals, I think it does make a measure of sense to have that split. It's just kind of a shame because I have to choose between getting Wrathmongers and getting Bloodthirsters and Skull Cannons as Khorne. That's a bit of a shame, especially because Khorne does, funnily enough, Khorne can play taller better than most other races because you don't need, well, taller in the sense that you don't need to go out there and be crazy about conquering vast amounts of territory. You can handle an entire Khorne campaign with just one province. Of course, it depends on the province. I mean, Zarnagrund is just like free real estate at this point for so many people, right? But yeah, it's wonderful race design, After Omens of Destruction, a really great campaign in Arbol, less great campaign with Skulltaker. I think that's campaign just not that great. I actually do prefer playing Scarbrand, funnily enough. I do actually enjoy playing Scarbrand right now than pre-patch, and I certainly enjoy playing him more than Skulltaker. But that's just me. But yeah, Khorne as a race is great, Skulltaker's campaign start and Lustrous sucks. Just simple as that. Also balancing some design choices, etc. The ogres, and I'm not just talking about Goldfag Maneater over here in this video, I'm talking about the ogres in general as a race. Now, certainly a good portion of that comes down to the fact that each ogre campaign is pretty damn sweet. Be it Scrag, who apparently is getting obliterated by Gorbad over here, be it Scrag with his meat and ridiculous over-the-top magic and gorgers, Greasus, who's certainly embraced being the god of money in Warhammer Free, or of course Goldfag with his mercenary contracts. All ogre campaigns are very unique and very interesting to play in their own way. Which is my favorite? It's tricky to say, really. Like, on one hand, I do really like aspects of Greasus, I like aspects of Scrag. Like, for me, the best ogre campaign would be a combination of all their mechanics in one. That would be freaking amazing. Maybe that's something we could have in the future going forward, just saying. But regardless, I think CA has really nailed it with the ogres in a lot of significant ways. See, one of the things that's fun is being able to recruit a variety of units in a campaign. Yes, it may not be efficient. I emphasize that aspect. I've said that in my Doomstack videos. But it is fun to do so. It is not a problem to be able to recruit Doomstacks. The problem is actually the opposite, when so many races, so many campaigns in the game incentivize you to recruit very cheap, very cost-effective units. But that's not really a problem for the Ogres. And the reason that's not a problem for the Ogres is how their settlements work. All their settlements go up to tier 3, and they get hero capacity and economic viability, as well as decent number of units to recruit, including lead belchers. But then their main recruitment buildings are from the camps. And the great aspect about this, even if camps may take too many turns to get to tier 5, potentially, when you're dumping in a lot of freaking resources in something, it would be nicer to be able to do it faster. But all the same, what's really great about the camp system is we don't need a lot of settlements to handle our unit recruitment. We need settlements for economy, we need settlements for the sake of hero capacity, but when it comes to the actual unit recruitment, you only really need, in the vast majority of cases, a handful of settlements that are high level to be able to do so. And Ogres are brilliant at this because the camps do not require your principal resource, which is money. So one of the issues that you do encounter with unit variety in a lot of campaigns is like just even spending the money to unlock those buildings is a very expensive affair that may not be the most efficient way of resources. Whereas with Ogres, it is very efficient to spend a lot of the meat in a camp, get it to a very high level, and unlock a biblical level of power, and unlock a huge level of variety. Cavalry, artillery, melee units of all types, monstrous units, etc. That is fun. That is great. That is really fun. So I think CA with Ogres have kind of hit that sweet spot, or as close to a sweet spot as they ever have, in terms of how to make a race work with limited territory, because that's one of the brilliant things, but also give you a good amount of power. Because one of the reasons pushing for a lot of territorial expansion is the best way to play the game is because it gives you more power. It ultimately pays off economically. It ultimately gives you more units, it gives you more heroes, all that. That is not how Ogres play. So surprisingly, just by designing a race very well, or redesigning a race in a very good fashion, they have given people a lot more choice, a lot more consequences for those choices. Because, yeah, you can recruit an army of, Iron Guts and all that, but it may take time. It may take multiple turns. I'm not fond of units taking multiple turns to recruit, by the way, just worth saying that. But it may take time, it may take a lot of resources, but it is that kind of dynamic that also works surprisingly well for a Skaven. Though without some of the pitfalls that even the Skaven have, who are already in a lot of ways a great race. So I think CA, of all the races affected by Thrones Decay, they've done a really, really good job here. With the Legendary Lords, with the race, with the unique mechanics for those Legendary Lords, and the diversity of campaigns, units, choices, consequences, etc. That is fantastic. But why are they not number one? Well, and at number one, it would of course be the Dwarves. And wow, what a messy situation we've got here. Quake, Malagor, all coming there on poor Khazra. Whatever shall we do? Well, I'm sure we'll come up with something, won't we? Right? And if that something may not be enough, well, there's also a little Age of Reckoning fun over here that can give us even more money. And, yeah. I gotta love using ambush tactics as the Dwarves. The reason is, the Dwarves, funnily enough, have one of the most ridiculous armies that's really good at ambushing, because even their base units, like, there's very few dwarf units that have low armor. But that's not the reason dwarves are number one on this list, though the hilarity they can get up to is certainly a big part of it. See, dwarven campaigns are just so over-the-top nonsense that you can't help but appreciate the bullshit that they get up to. Because look at that. Malagor and Quake all at once. Oh, but maybe I don't want to lose one of those units. Don't worry, lads. We got a solution. We got many solutions for many different problems that we might encounter over here. No reason to worry too much about that. We can get a flame cannon. And there's your problem solved. This is, by the way, legendary difficulty. Like, yeah, it's hilarity. But again, the reason I feel like dwarves are the best race to play at the moment, and that's kind of the aspect here, it's not because you can do stuff like that. You can do stuff like that as any race. I just found it amusing how much I've manipulated everything in my favor in this entire campaign situation. It's only turn 16. And I've been like, oh, let's ambush Skarsnik. Maybe I'll do a video on Foreground. But what it really boils down to, beyond the sheer variety of options, heroes, units, yeah, you don't have cavalry, you have flying ranged units that the game is clearly not designed to handle. Gyrocopters are just fun. You have flamethrowers, you have flying flamethrowers, you got guns, you got many guns, even more guns, because why not? And you have ultimate... You say have strategic bombers in a fantasy medieval game. You could say industrial revolution. Yeah, there is an industrial revolution going on, and it's sure as shit not the greenskins that are responsible for it. Or even the Skaven. It is the dwarves in that respect. So huge amount of variety with units. Lots of heroes that can recruit, lots of choices in their campaigns early on. But beyond just that happening in every single Dwarven campaign, even like someone like Forik, like every single Dwarf campaign, and it's gotta be said, every single Dwarf campaign has a lot of variety you can go for. Even Grombrindle. Like, Grombrindle is actually surprisingly the most straightforward campaign, because your objective is to wipe out Malekith. But while that's true, what do you do after? So, think of this. The worst Dwarf campaign, and I mean worst in the sense of, like, linearity, right, is Grombrindle. When the worst campaign for your race from a choice perspective is a guy who starts in the Nagrand freaking Thunderdome, Malekith, Valkia, and all the others that are over, and Katep and others that are here, you know a race is in a really good spot. I mean, you can say, well, Forik, you know what Forik has next to him? Yeah, the Khemri Thunderdome and the jungle and then the Badlands north of him. That is one of the things that I think makes the dwarves far better. It's having these campaigns. They're certainly a ridiculously powerful race, but geez, the amount of shit you can get up to in these campaigns is insane. Whether or not you're a veteran player or a new player, dwarves are amazing to play because of the dynamics of their campaigns. But there's more. See, there's legendary grudges, which give you longer-term objectives to pursue in a campaign. The Age of Reckoning gives you short-term objectives. I know that there's a bunch of people who are like, oh, the dwarves should play statically. That is not what dwarves do in the lore. If you ever bother reading the lore as opposed to whatever presumptuous bullshit you think you have about it, you would realize the dwarves don't sit on their fucking hide doing nothing. That's like they do sometimes when they fail. When all other options have failed, the dwarves seal their holds. Every other time the dwarves are out there, they're active, they're kicking ass, they're taking names. What do you think Gotrek and Felix are exceptional in all the adventures they get up to? Sure, they're exceptional in how successful they are. That's a very different affair. But again, dwarves go out there and do shit. Thorgrim does it, Belegar does it, Forik is literally a world wonder. So this is so very appropriate. Balancing wise, yeah, sure, you know. But the Age of Reckoning encourages you to go out there. It's not necessarily about conquering a vast array of territory. Truth be told, the reason I'm conquering a vast array of territory has more to do with the legendary grudges objectives, because, yeah, let's just take the entirety of the World's Edge Mountains and ensure that we get the underway network. Having a teleport mechanic, I wish it was a bit easier. Like, I feel like maybe they should split this off in a bit of a couple of ones to, like, give you more options in regards to restoring the underway network, rather. I think that would be better. Like, there's still some balancing things I would improve, just to make them a bit faster paced, or give you some of these cool options faster. Because there's a lot of really cool shit over here, and their campaigns can be complete bananas. But then the ultimate aspect is the fact that they guarantee confederation with all other legendary lords. But the way they do it is also freaking brilliant. See, with Carl, you have to spend resources and get vision. You don't care about that. The way you confederate as a dwarf, another dwarf, is you go out there, you know, play your campaign well, and that is how you guarantee a freaking confederation. So it's like, oh, if I'm playing the game well, if I'm playing the game slowly, I'll still do it. If I'm playing the game well, I will do it much faster. And think of this, how much variety there is. Like, consider Thorgrim's campaign. Let's say you confederate Belegar first, right? That's a completely different campaign than if you confederate Malachi first, or if you confederate Grombrindle, if you confederate Forik. I would probably not recommend confederating Forik, just to be clear on that. The guy is very durable. Like, you probably want to confederate factions like Malachi or Grombrindle, who don't have that kind of durability. But it just opens up these possibilities, assuming they don't get wiped out. But if they're wiped out, you just get the Lord. But if they don't get wiped out, you get their empire. You can even declare war on them and fight a brutal war and still guarantee confederation. I'd probably not. I don't think that's very thematic for the dwarves, but hey, what do I know? So, it is all of these little choices in a dwarven campaign that makes it work. Now, to be certain, I do think that some of those legendary grudges are a bit spaced out too much and may take too much time in some respects. But like the idea of the system is just simply put freaking amazing. Like there's no argument on that as far as I see it. Like it is one of the best campaign systems in the game for any race, and I kind of wish more races had that. Not in the way that the legendary grudges work, but the dynamic objectives, the long-term objectives, and the medium-term objectives. Because you have all of these kind of things. And it makes every single Dwarven campaign substantially better. How much better? Well, I've played over 3,000 hours in Immortal Empires alone. Out of those 3,000 hours, I've spent over 300 probably, in Malachi's campaign alone. But then you add in the time I've spent with Ungrim, with Thorgrim, or Belegar inside. I would not be surprised if 500 to 600 hours of all the time I've spent in Warhammer 3 has been with the Dwarves post-Thrones Decay. Because it is just that it avoids the pitfalls of so many other campaigns where you feel you're doing the same thing over and over again. You realize, okay, this is the most efficient path possible. There are certainly more efficient paths than others. But think of Thorgrim's campaign, right? Like, you could just, let me just defeat Skarsnik, right? And then go slowly grind down Gorbat. It's like, well, what if I go against Tretch? Or what if I set up some nice ambushing for Tretch and obliterate his armies as they feed me gold? Which, by the way, I did here. What if I ensure that I get the Confederation of Karak Azul, then obliterate Queek? Which is, by the way, what I've done, because Karak Azul gave me a full freaking stack. It scales well across difficulty, it scales well on Legendary, it handles very well as a system, it's really thoughtful and well designed. It's still amazing how much you can still discover with the Dwarves, even after all these months of Thrones of Decay. Even for all the hours I've spent with them, it's still the one race I keep coming back to, because they're that freaking fun. And it's the philosophy, really, that I believe every game should have. It's like, easy to play. The Dwarves are easy to play. You can't argue that, like, you know, Quarrelers and Dwarf Warriors and all that are hard to use. Or Gyrocopters. But hard to master. And what is mastering them? Is it like building an unstoppable army? No. It is building an unstoppable freaking empire around the world. Like, Dwarves, and it's about discovering stuff. The more you play, the more you realize, wow, there's so much more over here, so much depth, so much complexity that I didn't realize existed before. That is why the Dwarves are the #1 race in Total War Warhammer 3 at the moment. By far. Like, don't get me wrong. Arbol, Golkfang, amazing campaigns. But they're just roughly on par, somewhat, or maybe a bit better to what Thorgrim can do. They're still inferior to what Malachi can do. Because you think that all that I just mentioned here is the Dwarves as a race. Don't get me started on the insanities that Malachi gets up to in his campaign, because that's what makes it even better. That's all I have to say. Costin signing out.